Okay, the main topics we're going to talk about today is why we're seeing a lot of growth in solar, what our state laws say about solar, both who are the decision makers and what are the criteria that they use. And there's a spoiler here. Local governments have very little say, but we're also still testing this a bit related to solar. We've had some changes. We're going to talk about some recent solar examples and then some wrap-up ideas. Becky, would you launch the first poll? Um, I just have a couple of questions here in terms of what your role is, and I believe another question below that in terms of your experience with large-scale solar. And by large-scale solar, in this case, I probably mean anything over 5 or 10 acres. So if you can let us know what your experience is, what you've seen or not seen along those lines. All right, so I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then I'll come back to those poll results. Okay, if we look at where our electricity is coming from in Wisconsin, first of all, as is probably obvious, we all use electricity for many different things, including air conditioning in the summer, but lights, computers, many things. And in Wisconsin, while we have been adding more renewable energy, the bulk of our energy, 71%, is still coming from fossil fuels. We have no fossil fuels in Wisconsin. And when we burn fossil fuels like natural gas and coal, they emit greenhouse gases that cause climate change. And so the people of Wisconsin, because we're importing all these fossil fuels, we pay around $16 billion a year to import our energy. In terms of costs of electricity production, you can see in this graph that solar went from the most expensive electricity in 2009 to the second least expensive electricity in 2016, and it stayed down at that low level. So economics now favor solar installation. So I'm going to take a quick look at the poll results. Yep. Great. Okay, so we see that we have a number of planning staff and zoning staff, some elected officials and plan commission or zoning committee members, and a handful of consultants. So that's great. In terms of your experience seeing large-scale solar, being involved in it, I see one person has visited it. A couple people live within 5 minutes. A few people were involved as a local official when a solar facility was permitted, or you were a planner, or that was meant to be zoning staff. And we've got, it looks like the majority of people who responded saying that this is one of your first exposures to large scale solar. So great, we'll go from there. You may have to X out the poll box in order to get that off your screen. Okay. So I want to talk about the different types of solar that happen in Wisconsin and elsewhere. There are many different types of solar, and some of these overlap. We have utility solar by the electric companies. We have community solar. We'll talk about that in a bit. Residential solar, like on your rooftop or in your yard. People are starting to put solar over parking lots or on top of commercial buildings. Some local governments are installing solar, and solar on brownfield sites, so contaminated sites or closed landfills, that sort of thing. So now if we go down this list in terms of what's allowed by law in Wisconsin and what's profitable and therefore moving forward. Utility scale solar is both allowed and profitable, and we're seeing a lot of it. Community solar, to define it a little bit, it's typically smaller, 5 megawatts, so that's about 35 acres or smaller. In Minnesota, they've had a law allowing that community solar since 2013, and as a result, they have quite a lot of community solar, over 800 megawatts of community solar, but in small chunks, in those 35 acre or smaller chunks. In Wisconsin, there have been multiple community solar bills, but they have not gone forward. The utilities have been opposed to them. So we're kind of crossing off community solar. There is some community solar allowed by utilities that's owned by them, but no other community solar in Wisconsin. In terms of residential solar, obviously we have some solar on rooftops. In Wisconsin, third-party financing, someone else paying for the solar system up front is not allowed. And in addition, the payments beyond what you use, anything that's put back on the grid, gets low payments. So that doesn't favor residential solar. It's the same situation with solar over parking lots. In addition, I just want to mention that it's much less expensive to put solar on a parking lot when you're building the parking lot. It's much more expensive to tear it up later and put it over. Commercial solar is becoming more profitable, both because these commercial buildings have high electricity loads, and in addition, it can provide good public relations. Local government solar is allowed and reduces some costs. Well, here are a couple of examples. The town of Hull put solar on their municipal building, and the city of Milwaukee down below put solar on a former landfill within the city of Milwaukee. So that goes with the last one also, solar on brownfields. There are some new, in limited situations, incentives through the IRA for solar on brownfields. So what we have coming out the other end, based on our energy policies in Wisconsin and the cost of solar, is a lot of utility scale solar, and then a little bit of commercial and residential, a little bit of local government solar, and very little in terms of solar over parking lots or on brownfields at this point. And that's shown in this annual solar installation graph. You can see from 2020 on, we're seeing a lot more solar, and most of it is utility scale solar. That's what our current Wisconsin energy policies support, is this large utility scale solar. And some of these utility scale solar projects are 10 megawatts and others are 1,000 megawatts. So there's a large range in size there. Our current energy policies don't provide much support for community solar. In fact, community solar is not allowed in Wisconsin unless it's utility owned, and also not much support for residential solar, or not nearly as much as could be provided. Okay, so that puts us toward utility scale solar, solar on the land directly, not on top of rooftops or parking lots. So when I talk about megawatts, it takes 7 to 10 acres of land to produce a megawatt of electricity. And just a little factoid, compared to wind, the big wind turbines that are being put up are 2 to 3 megawatts. So each wind turbine is equivalent to about 20 acres of solar. Okay, so on an 80-acre field, we might get 10 megawatts. I wanted to point out that when you look at Wisconsin and how much solar energy falls on the land, it's nearly uniform across the state. It's different from wind. It's not the high spots that get the most solar. The solar is almost the same statewide, and that's also true across the Midwest. Okay. I wanted to provide a few examples. If I remember correctly, one person had been to a large scale solar. So over spring break this year, my daughter and I visited the Wood County solar installation in the county next to us. It's 1,200 acres and 150 megawatts developed by Alliant Energy. So this was the sign out by the road. And then let's show you a few photos inside. First, we've got construction. They usually bulldoze the area. And then they're putting in the posts that will hold up the solar panels. They install the solar panels on those posts. It's a large scale area. This is a photo from Alliant. And it's also important to keep in mind the fencing around solar. Fences are required by the National Electrical Code, and when we think about effects on wildlife, fences become significant. This is what it looks like at the gate right near that sign that I showed you up front. And just to give you a feel for the size and the size of the openings of the fence, I played volleyball for a lot of years, so I know I can reach 8 feet when I stick my hand up. So this fence is around 9 feet. And you can see the gaps in the fence are a little bit bigger than my hand. Okay, now I'm gonna skip over to some work done here at Center for Land Use Education by Anna Haynes, Austin Holland, and student Jordan Campbell. They looked at solar suitability as they estimate a solar developer would look at it across the state. So there were a number of factors that went into their analysis. The first is, in order to install utility scale solar, you need a big transmission line. So first they looked at where are those transmission lines in Wisconsin. Similarly, where are the utility substations in the state? Then they looked at slope. Typically, solar works best on moderate, either flat or moderately sloped areas, not steep slopes. And then land cover and other constraints. So they were basically looking at undeveloped areas. So those are the pieces that went into their final suitability map. We'll have the full paper linked to the webinar resource page if you want to learn more. You're welcome to call me as well. So this is the map that they produced as a result. So the lightest colors, the yellows, are those areas found most suitable for large scale solar. So you can see here in the Central Sands, that really pops out, as well as this whole northeast area and some down in southeast and south central Wisconsin. I want to focus or state that this is an estimate. It doesn't include all the factors. We don't know if the factors that are included are weighted exactly right. So a further in-depth analysis is critical to determine the true solar suitability at the local level. And some things that were not included here that you would want to include are cultural resources, threatened and endangered species, as well as local land use plans, the plan that the community has for the area. If we break this out on the county level, it helps you see which counties pop out the most. Again, the Central Sands, Northeast, and then some of these South Central counties really pop out. Also note that we've got over 7 million acres that were found to be suitable or highly suitable for solar from a solar developer's perspective. Okay, so I want you to, in the chat box, if you would comment on why do you think solar developers often choose to locate solar panels on farmland? If you would weigh in on that a bit, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'm going to go through this table and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so in Wisconsin, we have 9.2 million acres of harvested cropland. Of those, our number one crop is field corn on about half of that, 4 million acres. Of the corn, 1 million acres is used for corn ethanol. So that's used for vehicle fuel, for energy, not food. The solar that we have installed, either it's already online or it's under construction in 2024, is 15,000 acres of solar. And the amount of solar that will be needed, especially if we don't make any changes to allowing rooftop solar or incentivizes rooftop solar, is around 250,000 acres. So that makes up 2 to 3% of our harvested cropland, and it's about a quarter as much land as is being currently used for corn ethanol. Becky, what are you seeing in the chat box in terms of why solar developers choose to locate solar on farmland?
So I'm seeing large tracts of land, willing landowners, less neighbors to complain, relatively flat land, so there's less grading involved, and most of it's already clear.
Yeah.
There's a few more being added. Let's see, give soil a chance to regain nutrients without being farmed, so there's a recovery period.
Okay. Yeah. I think all of those are accurate. About 2 years ago, we brought a solar developer into one of our undergrad classes, and they added one other reason that solar developers prefer farmland, particularly farmland that's been farmed at least 10 years. And they stated they want that kind of land because it's unlikely to have any habitat for threatened and endangered species, and that makes getting it permitted easier. So that was one additional reason, but I very much agree with what you're saying. The other thing is you said larger tracts of land, and the way that they express that is they would rather work with 10 landowners than 100 landowners to develop leases and move forward. So yes. I also wanted to point out that it's not just solar that's reducing cropland. Residential, commercial, industrial development, especially when it's scattered like this, these large residential lot sizes that are 5 acres or 10 acres, use up a lot of land. Okay, I just want to touch briefly on the amount of energy generated per acre for different energy producing things. So I want you to focus on the top one, solar, 25 gigawatt hours per year, compared to corn ethanol at the bottom is around 2. So we get about 12 times more energy per acre from solar than we do from corn ethanol. I also want to touch on Wisconsin law says the owners of solar farms greater than 50 megawatts, between 350 and 500 acres, will pay annually into a utility aid fund, which is shared with the local governments where that solar farm is located. These are the annual payment rates per megawatt, so per 7 acres of solar farm. So if you have 100 let's see, 700 acres, so 100 megawatts, then you would expect to get 100 times this amount. These same solar farms are exempt from local property taxes. They have found that these annual payments for solar are typically much larger than the property taxes. There is also a maximum cap in utility aid. And I haven't known it to happen yet, but there are some rural communities with not a lot of people, but a lot of solar that may reach that cap. We have some towns with multiple solar farms adding up the acreage and the megawatts. Okay, so now we're going to jump to who makes the decisions on large solar projects. So we've got the solar project proposed. The first question is, how big is it? If it's 100 megawatts or larger, that's 700 acres or larger, it's the Wisconsin Public Service Commission that will make the decision on where it's located and most of the details related to it. There are 3 commissioners on the Public Service Commission, plus they have a large staff. And there's no local government approval needed. There's no local government authority on these large projects. For solar projects that are less than 100 megawatts or less than around 700 acres, local government zoning comes into effect if you have zoning in your county, in your town, but it is quite limited in what they can do. They can only apply the state standards, and I'll show you in just a minute what those state standards are. In fact, it's on this slide. So first, those over 100 megawatts, no local jurisdiction, no local authority to regulate those. For solar energy systems up to 100 megawatts, up to 99 or 100, a local jurisdiction can require zoning approval, but only as follows. No local government can place any restriction on a solar energy system unless it satisfies one of the following conditions. It serves to preserve or protect the public health or safety. It doesn't significantly increase the cost of the system or decrease its efficiency, or it allows for an alternative system of comparable cost and efficiency. Beyond these three, if it doesn't meet these three, no other restrictions are allowed. So it's fairly limited. For those larger projects, 100 megawatts or more that go before the Public Service Commission, there's a list of standards that they have to consider. And they can only approve an application if the commission determines that all of the following are true. I don't have the full list. You can look that up in statute, but I want to highlight a couple of them. The proposed facility will not have an undue adverse impact on environmental values. And that's why the Department of Natural Resources is involved in these large projects with the Public Service Commission. They're looking at things like erosion and soil compaction, runoff, issues like that. And then the other one that I want to highlight is it says the commission can only approve an application if the proposed facility will not unreasonably interfere with the orderly land use and development plans for the area involved. I want to share my observations on that so far. So it raises the question, does the Public Service Commission give weight to those local government land use plans like a comp plan or a land use plan or a farmland preservation plan? And from what I've seen so far, I have not looked at every Public Service Commission decision on solar. They're not looking at the local land use plan so far. I asked the Public Service Commission staff, they said they have no land use planners on their PSC staff. And I haven't seen any staff recommendations related to land use plans. Possibly there are a few out there, but I haven't seen any in all of the solar decisions I've looked at. Now we have had a change in the Public Service Commission, the 3 commissioners. So it's possible this will change with new Public Service Commissioners, and it's possible it won't too. All right, one other tool that's out there is joint development agreements. This is between the solar developer and the local governments. They're voluntary. Sometimes they're signed. They can outline the expectations for both the local governments and the solar developers and therefore reduce the unknown, but they're not required in order to get PSC approval. Some topics that the JDAs may include which roads will be used by the heavy trucks, what the weight limits are, who will pay for repairs, decommissioning when the solar farm is finished with its operations, providing financial assurances and a timeline for removing the solar panels and the posts and all the rest. It can address things like setbacks from roads and lot lines, the fencing height, if there's going to be a gap at the bottom of the fence, what kind of fence is going to be used, as well as the length of the fence. And that's what I'm showing here. On a recent proposal, the original proposal said they would have 1 mile lengths of fence. And then you can see like, here's the road here, fairly narrow. So one of the things that came out in joint development agreement is that this block would be broken up and there would be more corridors between it so that wildlife and especially deer aren't funneled along the roads to the same extent. Some JDAs also have what they call a cooperation clause, where the local governments, when they sign the JDA, agree to not oppose a solar project during the permitting by the PSC in exchange for the benefits of the JDA. I want to point out that the JDA doesn't cover everything that a Public Service Commission decision does. The JDA does not address the location of the solar project, which fields the solar panels will be built on. Okay, we've got another poll here. I'm going to talk, thank you, Becky. I'm going to talk a little bit about public participation and perceptions related to solar projects. And this comes from a national survey of 984 people who lived within 3 miles of a large-scale solar project. They define large-scale solar as a megawatt or larger, so 7 acres or more. Okay, so some of their findings were most people agree that large-scale solar projects increase American energy independence, that we don't have to bring as much energy, oil, and other sources in from overseas. So over 50% of people agreed with that. Very large, greater than 100 megawatts, so greater than around 700-acre projects elicit substantially more negative attitudes compared to smaller and mid-sized projects. Specifically here, if you look at the negative or very negative, if you're over 100 megawatts, you can see you're at maybe 65% of people who have a negative attitude. Whereas if you drop below 700 acres, that percentage comes down to, it looks like 5 or 10%. So much lower. I also want to point out that they found, and this is again a nationwide study, not specific to Wisconsin, that only 17% of the people that responded to the survey were aware of the large-scale solar project prior to construction. This suggests room for improvement in planning and community engagement. And then when I look at that compared to what I've seen in Wisconsin, I see that solar developers vary greatly in the extent and how they engage the public. Some solar developers have local staff in a local office who keep the public informed, Facebook pages, showing up at local events to answer questions, coming to employers and answering questions, getting the local residents answers to their questions. As well as making changes to the projects based on public input, public concerns. I've also seen other solar developers who don't have any staff locally, and information and answers to questions are hard to get. Sometimes people don't feel that their questions are answered at all. And then local residents and local governments have little influence. I would also note that it's difficult for the decision makers, the public service commissioners in Wisconsin, to engage residents near those projects that they decide on 100 megawatts or more, because the PSC is located in Madison, and the local governments, the town halls, county buildings where people might go, they don't have any legal authority, any ability to decide. The PSC in these large solar project decisions does hold one local public hearing near the proposed solar site. It's usually late in the process when a lot has already been decided, when all the leases with the landowners have been signed. The public service commissioners don't attend, is what I've been told. They are given a transcript of the public hearing. Okay. I also want to share these results. There are numerous opportunities to improve participation, providing information and fairness. The people who responded here said some of the things that they disagreed with is they weren't given enough information prior to approval. They didn't have the ability to influence decisions. And after the solar project was built, they don't receive enough information about it and what's going on. Okay, and that's my reminder to go back to the survey results that you were filling out. Have you had a large-scale solar project built near you? It looks like 5 out of 21 have. And if a large-scale solar project has been built near you. What applied? So everyone said that they knew about the solar project prior to approval. And then if we go through the rest, nobody checked the other options. So you didn't agree with the planning process was fair, you were given enough information, you had adequate opportunities to participate, you were encouraged to participate, you had the ability to influence decisions, or you receive enough information about the project now after it's been built. Okay, so this is a very small sample set, but interesting results. Okay, so again, you might have to X out the survey, the poll results. Okay, now I'm going to jump into a local example. I'm going to talk about 2 solar farms in this area in southwest Portage County. This is the aerial photo shown here. You can see this is the village of Plover up top. With the town of Plover, the town of Grant, and this is the town of Buena Vista over here. These are mostly rural towns with lots of agricultural land. It's the Central Sands, that's why you see lots of sand, as well as lots of circles that are center pivots, center pivot irrigation systems. You've got the Wisconsin River running here along the top, as well as a number of trout streams and wetlands, and this public and wooded land in the southern part. Okay. The town of Plover took the lead in planning for solar in this area. There was one solar project shown here in red. This is Portage Solar that was proposed and approved by the Public Service Commission. And after that, the town said, we're going to plan for solar. We're going to adopt an amendment to our comprehensive plan, showing where we think solar, where our town is well suited for solar, and where we feel there are conflicts, where we would rather not have solar. So the white areas shown here are those areas where they felt it was a good fit. And the cross-hatched black and white areas are those areas where they didn't feel it was a good fit. These down here are mostly wetlands. And then along here, this is their industrial commercial area along Highway 54. They already have infrastructure installed there to serve industries. And then along here, this is part of their 20-year planning boundary for urban, the sewer plan, sewer service plan. So they wanted to keep this open for new residential development. So that was their plan. The town of Grant, just to the south of them, also wanted to develop a plan to provide some information to the Public Service Commission about where they felt solar was well suited or not in their town. They heard that many landowners, encompassing thousands of acres, had signed leases for this new project, Vista Sands. They knew the town of Plover had already done something, had their adopted solar overlay. And like I said, they were interested in having a say in front of the Public Service Commission. They requested assistance from Extension and the town of Plover and held a town meeting, asking their residents whether they were in support of developing a map, a solar overlay map. The town residents voted unanimously to develop a map. So they worked on this, many discussions over 8 months, to develop their overlay map, and the rationale that goes with it. This map is not specific to Vista Sands. It applies to all future solar projects in the town. And they adopted 2 versions of their solar overlay map, first in October of 2023, and then a second one in February of 2024. Their goals were to protect their rural area and way of life, to protect grassland species. They have a large grassland area in their town. I'll talk more about that in a bit. To protect the wildlife corridors along the trout streams. They often saw a wide variety of wildlife along those trout streams and to protect homeowners adjacent to the solar project. So this is what their map looked like. The green is the Buena Vista Wildlife Area. This is state land that was purchased with taxpayer dollars in order to provide grassland, habitat for grassland species, including the prairie chickens. The white areas shown here, they thought were suited to solar development, and the cross-hatched areas close to the Buena Vista Wildlife Area and some wetlands in here, they thought were not a good fit. Then Vista Sands applied for their permit to the Public Service Commission in January of 2024. The green areas, the green cross-hatched areas are their primary proposed solar arrays, and the purple are their alternate. The light green colors down here, this is the Buena Vista Wildlife Area. So this project is proposed at 1,300 megawatts, 4 times larger than the largest solar project in Wisconsin today. So it's 10.5 square miles. You think of a square mile like a country block, a mile on each side. So 10.5 of those as primary areas and another nearly 5 square miles as alternate areas. And this is both abutting next to as well as intermingled with the Buena Vista Wildlife Area. And keep in mind the scale, this is 2 miles shown down here. So it's approximately 7.5 miles east to west and about 7 miles north to south is the size of this proposed project. The project includes the solar panels with 7-foot fences around each solar array, a 300 megawatt battery system, approximately 120 miles of underground collector circuits, 5 substations, and 4 to 5 miles of the high voltage transmission line. Why this size? Some of the people at the town meetings ask the developer, why did you choose to make it this size? And the developer said, that they had looked at, there's a high voltage transmission line that runs here along Highway 54. They had looked at the capacity of that line and how much additional electricity could be added to that line at that location. And so based on the available capacity on the transmission line, they wanted this many acres of solar to put as much electricity as would fit on the line on. Just to give you a feel for those of you that haven't looked at an application to the Public Service Commission, this is what their application, just the table of contents, looked like. So you can see it's about 170 pages plus many, many appendices from A through Z plus a few more. So back to what's going on here. Since the mid 1800s, we've lost most of our grassland in Wisconsin. Most of it has been converted to agriculture. It's the yellow that's shown as grassland, and you can see most of it's gone by 1938 already in this one. The Buena Vista Wildlife Area is 12,700 acres. It's a partnership between the DNR and a number of conservation groups to purchase lands specifically to maintain grassland habitat for the greater prairie chicken, which is a threatened species in Wisconsin, as well as other grassland dependent species. It has more prairie chickens than any other area in the state of Wisconsin. In central Wisconsin, prairie chickens are a big deal. We have an annual Prairie Chicken Festival that started in 2006 with a day or a couple of days worth of events each year. This project was picked up by the Milwaukee Journal. Paul Smith wrote a massive proposed Wisconsin solar farm could wreak havoc on the threatened prairie chickens. The Wisconsin Wildlife Federation got involved and said, you know, well, the fragility of the prairie chicken population in the state, Buena Vista is the key property with 60 to 70% of the state's population of prairie chickens, but the species has trended downward and is heading toward its survival tipping point. One of the big concerns that Wisconsin Wildlife Federation had was how these fences, 7, 8, 9 foot tall fences would affect the prairie chickens. Just recently, a couple days ago, the final environmental impact statement, this is put together by the Public Service Commission and DNR together, was released. And it stated the prairie chicken generally stays away from trees, fences, towers, and other human-built structures. It's partly a survival instinct since hawks and other predators roost on these high points. As a result of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation said in its testimony, the best available scientific research would indicate that there should be a minimum of a half-mile setback of the solar arrays from the grassland habitat on Buena Vista Wildlife Area and a minimum of 1 mile distance between the solar arrays and the prairie chicken leks. Those are the breeding grounds for the prairie chickens. I saw the question pop up, why are fences required and necessary? They're required by the National Electrical Code, so it's not a state or a local decision. And my understanding is it's for 2 reasons. One is safety. You don't want people, I don't think there's a high chance of being electrocuted, but you don't want them in by these solar panels that are generating electricity. And secondly, to try to prevent vandalism. Those are the main reasons from what I understand. Good question. Okay. So the Vista Sands Solar Farm is the first that had an environmental impact statement, which is a greater level of review. And in May of this year, groups represented by attorneys, they're known as interveners, started to provide testimony and rebuttal before an administrative law judge. So you can see the groups involved here. The towns initially filed to be interveners, but then pulled out when the JDA was signed because they felt that having the JDA signed was more important. The testimony covers a lot of topics. The PSC, the commissioners will receive the legal record from the administrative law judge and the final environmental impact with PSC staff recommendations. The PSC decision has to be done by January of next year. Okay, I can see that I'm getting short on time, so I'm going to hop through some of these. This is just the combination of Portage Solar plus Vista Sands Solar in purple. Portage Solar is in salmon. So a number of wrap-up points. We've seen a lot of change and potential change in this rural community since 2022 when the first solar farm was proposed. Some local residents say these proposals came very fast, over 15 square miles leased for Vista Sands, and some of the locals feel they were blindsided by that. It's typical for developments. The developers plan for years and the local government finds out about it near the end and is sometimes surprised when the proposal is filed. Due to this, as land use professionals, we always recommend planning. Plan ahead, anything could come your way, and use strong language so that your plans and your ordinances are meaningful. The towns of Grant and Plover updated their comp plans in 2018 and 2021, but they didn't include solar. There was little utility scale solar in Wisconsin at that time. And there were many other issues that they had to deal with. So we say plan, but what weight, if any, will the PSC give to local land use plans when deciding on where new solar projects will be located? I'm going to get back to that question and some possible ways to address it. We know that to address climate change, we need renewable energy. It also moves us towards energy independence and not spending so much money on energy that comes from out of state. Our current Wisconsin policies don't allow community solar. They don't favor rooftop or smaller solar projects. There are some steps that could be taken to get more of those things. Local government has no jurisdiction for projects over 100 megawatts and very limited conditions for smaller projects. There's currently no limit on the amount of land in a town or a county that can be approved for solar. And joint development agreements between the solar developer and local governments are sometimes signed, and they can address road costs and decommissioning. But the JDA does not address the location of the solar project, and the JDA is voluntary. It's not required for PSC approval. So what do we know? We know that local government gives people where a large solar project is proposed an opportunity to meet in open meetings, reach agreement, develop a solar overlay map as part of their comp plan. But what about the weight that PSC gives to that? They've given little to no weight on the 14 solar projects that have come before them. They don't have a land use planner on staff to review the local plans. The summary of the plans is sometimes inaccurate in the environmental assessment and impact statements. And I haven't seen any staff recommendations go to PSC related to the land use plans. So a question is, should solar developers be allowed to ignore the local people and just look at a map and site a solar farm based on how much capacity there is on the grid at that point? A few ideas, initial ideas for moving forward. The Public Service Commission or DOA, Department of Administration, could have a land use planner who compares solar project footprints and local land use plans for conflicts early in the process before the solar developer has obtained all these landowner leases. And another approach is similar to how landfills are dealt with now. Our society needs both. You know, we need energy sources and we need landfills. They're both essential needs. After a bad situation regarding a landfill in Marathon County, Wisconsin law was changed for landfills to include a negotiation process between local governments and landfill developers. The local governments can't say no to a landfill if the state feasibility study says the landfill is needed, but most topics can be negotiated between the landfill developer and local government. In addition, funding is provided to local governments to hire technical experts to get them up to speed on landfills. And I would argue that local governments need some expertise to get them up to speed on solar developments as well. A last thought is we have a wind energy system rule that has specifics about citing the process, citing wind energy systems. We could have a similar rule or legislation to adopt to address solar energy systems. So I realize there's no silver bullets here. Okay, on the webinar resource page, you will find the slides from today, as well as a recording that'll be posted in a couple of days. And then a few other resources. The Wisconsin Ledge Council put together a nice document that includes a flow chart for Public Service Commission solar approvals. The Wisconsin Public Service Commission has a docket search you can use to look it up. Look up specific cases. You can search by keyword, as well as current construction cases. And these are also situations that they're looking at, applications before them. And then the survey that I talked about here has many more survey questions. So you can take a look at that. We'll also put Center for Land Use Education solar suitability mapping site up on the webinar resource page. So that's what I have. I think we have a poll here in terms of what you might do after this webinar. If you have any ideas, if you could fill that out. We do have a demographic poll that we'll do after this. But any questions or comments at this time, please use the chat box and pop in what you're thinking. And we'll get to those here in a minute. Thank you for joining us today for sure, while we wait for people to respond to the poll and other pieces.